Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about the pre-made character. This comes from a question from Wes9353 who asked, Hey Uncle Tim, do you have a video on the preset character, what determines the stats of the preset character, and who determines the preset character? I call these pre-made characters. It's just the term I use. I tried to do this with saying preset and I kept saying pre-made. So I finally decided I'm just going to call this the pre-made character and say why I'm not calling it preset. I don't do this a lot. If you've played a lot of my RPGs, you'll find that most of them do not have pre-made characters. I encourage people to make their own. In fact, if you watched my video called What is an RPG? You remember I view RPGs as a continuum. There are certain characteristics I consider important to an RPG, and the more of those that you have, the more I consider you an RPG, and the less of those you have, the less I consider you an RPG. One of them was being able to make your own character. So if a game forces me to play a pre-made character, even if it's the best RPG on the planet, I just want to make it very clear that I don't consider it a full RPG. So yes, there's a lot of famous games out there that hand you a character at the beginning. I consider those to be not quite 100% an RPG. Are they non-RPGs? No. But if a game has a few more things like that, they start to turn into a non-RPG for me. Anyway, you may want to watch that video because I'm pretty clear about I like letting the player make their own character and making the game, and very much so the story in the game, adapt to the character that they've made. However, when I do have games that had pre-made characters, they're certainly not optimized. The thing I look for in pre-made characters, I look for like three things. The first one are, they have to be examples of what you could have made using the character creator. In other words, they're legal characters. I don't know what else to call them. When we provide those characters, you could make that exact same character if you just jumped into character editor and bought the attributes and skills and traits and all that yourself. The second thing I look for is I want them to be different from each other. I want them to kind of showcase the different intended playstyles we have for the game so that people, even if they choose not to use a pre-made character, they kind of see, oh wow, I can make some wildly different characters to play through this game. And then the third and extremely important feature of a pre-made character is they have to be able to complete the game. I have a whole video about this. It's called Fairness in Builds or whatever. It's linked below. We know, like on the Fallout ones, I know that these could complete it because we completed it. So any game of mine that you see yourself being given an option of just taking a pre-made character, you can bet that myself or someone else on the team or especially in QA have played that character through to the end of the game. So you asked about the Fallout pre-made characters, or actually you didn't, but that was the first one I think I had that had pre-made characters. Chris Taylor, lead designer, he made those, and he did it near the end of production. So for the longest time, you either had to make a character. I think we had a very default character that if you jumped in the game, you'd just be this default character. After Chris made those, I met with QA weekly, and I know I talked about that. I met with the lead of QA every week, and I'd often go over to QA and just drop in to see how the game was being played by them, because I saw some very unusual play styles. In fact, I walked in on them when they were playing the game of pull the pin out of a grenade or start the timer on some dynamite and then reverse pickpocket it into somebody. That was quite the game. But I asked them, hey, the pre-made characters we added, someone needs to take them and play them all the way through. And I told the lead of QA, I expect that in the weekly report, that you will tell me these many people played the different characters and made it through to the end. It's something I look for. Arcanum, we took the idea of the pre-made character and we took it a step further with the auto-leveling schemes. And that was where you could pick an auto-leveling scheme for your character, and then when you went up a level, it spent the points automatically. You didn't have to spend any. And the spend was based on an archetype that was described in the auto-leveling screen. We had a whole bunch. There was like a fire mage, a summoner mage, like a gunslinger. It might have been a gunslinger medic. Pure warrior, not magic or tech. There was a non-magic or tech thief. Then there was like a priest, which skewed magic but mostly healing. And then there was a druid that also skewed magic but was mostly nature stuff and some summoning and elemental spells. The auto-leveling schemes would do anything. They were also legal, and you could turn them on and off whenever you wanted. They would buy attributes, they would buy skills, they would buy spells, they would buy anything that you could buy as the character leveled up that was in support of the archetype. You can kind of think of those archetypes as classes, because Arcanum was a classless game. The way it worked is if you turned them off and played for a while and spent your own points, or even if you didn't, when you turned them back on, if there were points to be spent, it started at the beginning of the leveling scheme and looked for anything that hadn't been spent yet and then started spending. So that's why you could turn them on and off. You could turn them off, spend points in a different way, and then turn them back on, and it would go back to trying to build things for that archetype. Now, I think most people prefer to play an RPG with a character they get to make. And I also, after doing that auto level scheme for Arcanum, I realized I also like to level them up. And I don't, I completely agree. I don't understand people who don't want to do it. But we put it in there because premade characters and the auto leveling scheme are a great way to either dive into the game quickly or just make the game more palatable to casual players without taking anything away from the hardcore RPGer. You don't have to take the pre-made character. You don't have to have an auto-leveling scheme. But if you want to use those, first of all, if you just want to test the game, you can dive right in without having to know what everything is, knowing that the game will try to, you start with a decent character, and at least in Arcanum, it'll stay that way as it levels up. Once you understand the game, you can always go back and make a new character. So, I have had games with pre-made characters and also leveling schemes. In general, though, I don't do that because I prefer my RPGs to be player character forward, meaning you make choices and the game reacts to it. So anytime you abdicate some of that choice back to the designer, you're not making choices anymore. And if the whole POV of my games are you make choices and then you experience the consequences, it's kind of weird if you're saying, well, I'll let the designers make the choice, but I'm still going to experience the consequence. So that's another reason I think I view pre-made characters as one step in the continuum away from being an RPG. Anyway, I hope this answers your question. Wes9353.